Online Content Platform Migration Experiences and Collaboration, presented by Athena Huppner from the University of Central Florida Libraries, Matthew Rigucci from John Wiley & Sons, and Shashing Song from NC State University. Please refer to SCED for a complete biography of the speakers. We will be using the Zoom Q&A for questions during the session. Afterwards, please also participate in our online discussion forum, which can be located at the NASIG website, with additional questions and comments about this session. NASIG Code of Conduct applies to all discussions and presentations. The link to the forum and Code of Conduct are available at the NASIG website, and please tweet about the session using the hashtag NASIG 2020. I would like to thank the NASIG sponsors for helping us make our online conference freely available.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. So my name is Matthew, and I'll be leading this, this presentation. It's called Walk This Way, an online content platform migration experiences and collaboration, how we're both libraries and publishers and content providers, vendors are working together to improve the content platform migration experience. And I believe I have control of the slides. Oops. There we are. Sorry, thank you for bearing with me. Yes, as I said, my name is Matthew Rigucci. I'm the Associate Director of Product Marketing over at Wiley. I just let my colleagues introduce themselves as well.
Hello everyone, I'm Xiaoyan Song. I'm the Electronic Resource Librarian at North Carolina State University. Sina, you want to introduce yourself?
I beg your pardon. I didn't realize that my mute had been turned on, probably by me. I'm Athena Huppner, Discovery Services Librarian at the University of Central Florida. Did you all catch that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I'm trying to jump to the next slide here. Okay, to just briefly discuss our agenda for today and for this session, the introductions. Now that you've met all of the speakers, we've gotten that out of the way. First we'll be discussing the different migration experiences, both from the publisher perspective over at Wiley by yours truly, and then Yan will speak about the librarian migration experience at North Carolina State University, and then she'll pass over to Athena, who will talk about the the formation of the content platform migration work group, the work that has been done to date, and what we hope to accomplish by way of timeline and next steps. And before I get started with the just discussing the publisher migration experience, I just wanted to say that sometimes these decisions or actions of publishers can seem a bit arbitrary, and that perhaps we are unsympathetic to librarian needs and what they need to do in order to make the migration seamless for them and their users. But I just wanted to let you guys know that we do a lot of strategic planning, and decisions that are made are often deliberate ones that are largely in benefit of both the libraries and the publisher as well. But this is really, platform migrations are an immense undertaking on the publisher and platform provider side. So just wanted to consider, from the different perspectives, that we're not actively trying to make your lives more difficult. It's just that there are challenges that we face along the way, and hopefully you'll learn a few of them by virtue of this presentation from the publisher experience. So before I get started about the specific migration that recently took place, I thought it would be helpful to demonstrate that Wiley is no stranger to platform migrations, and sort of to help contextualize the platform-related activities that have happened within the company in the last 12 or so years. I've been at Wiley for about 5 years now, so I've had to do a little bit of oral history searching with my colleagues and getting them to share some of their war stories, not all of them good ones, about prior platform migration experiences and lessons learned. But I picked out the more salient points in our platform timeline. So back in 2007, Wiley acquired Blackwell Publishing, And this is really important to note because after that acquisition, there were two large online platforms sort of existing under the Wiley roof. You had Wiley InterScience, or WIS, and Blackwell Synergy. So a few years later, in 2010, a homegrown platform called Wiley Online Library was developed to house the content on both of these platforms. So WIS and Blackwell Synergy both came together under one roof. So we fast forward a few years later to the next significant platform event, which was when Wiley acquired Adapon. And this acquisition was made for a few reasons, certainly strategic to diversify the portfolio among other reasons, but most notably, it really allowed us to more easily move to their flagship product known as Literatum, which was one of the more popular scholarly publishing platforms in the industry. And so there's a lot of work and planning that went into this, and then in early 2018, our homegrown platform of Wiley Online Library moved to the Adapon instance of Literatum in March of 2018. And since then, there have been some tangential related platform migrations or content absorptions. Most notably, Blackwell Reference Online, or BRO, was hosted on the Highwire platform. That all of that content, largely humanities content, was moved over to Wiley Online Library. And then Access, which can be a confusing acronym if you have access or entitlement issues. Access stands for the American Crop, Soil, and Environmental Studies Society. The majority of their books and journal content came over to Wiley Online Library as well. So we're able to absorb all of that content and get it hosted in an effective way. That it definitely took a lot of work and preparation to make that as seamless as possible for users. So again, we are no strangers to platform migrations. We've experienced them probably more frequently as of late, and where our views on this are continuing evolving, and hopefully any subsequent platform migrations that come to pass, we will be better prepared for. There's a bit of a lag with the slides here. There we are. So what I really want to talk about from Wiley's perspective is a migration that I was most heavily involved in, which would be the Wiley Online Library migration to Literatum. So my involvement in this was largely from a marketing perspective. I sit on the marketing team, but I also dabbled a little bit in library technical services and in working with our vendor partners as well. But this was a move from a homegrown product, little Wiley Online Library, onto Literatum. We did this for a few reasons, but it's really important to consider the amount of resources and effort and staff sort of required to maintain a homegrown product, or platform rather. So the decision was made to move this to Literatum, which would also allow us for more features and functionalities, as being such a prominent product within the industry, to sort of expand upon what Wiley Online Library could do. So it really was a long time coming. This was certainly a cross-team collaboration. As I mentioned, I sit on the marketing team, but I met daily with product colleagues, both on the Wiley side and the Adapon side. I regularly interfaced with my sales colleagues to communicate things internally, but also platform migrations not only affect libraries or library users, but also societies and authors and researchers and corporate customers as well. So all of that sort of had to come together with a lot of planning and cross-functional work. Internally. Externally, the good news is we were able to leverage the relationships that we had with discovery vendors and partners who would be interested in things like changing link syntaxes. So our partners over at EBSCO and ProQuest and WT Cox and Ovid and everywhere else, we were able to communicate with them to make known the links that would be changing and the impact that would be on our mutual partners. Communication, cadence, and planning. We took the sort of approach, or rule of thumb, to communicate early and often. So we ultimately communicated, at least initially, the platform migration about 2 months prior. That was really the most notice that we could give, given the details that we had at the time. but then subsequent communications that went out to our library partners, sort of leading up to leading up to the migration and then shortly after as well. So that took a lot of planning and a all hands on deck sort of effort that I think that we were able to get the word out, but I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But really one of the notable things about this particular migration, it was a hard cutover. So there was no simultaneous hosting of the old Wiley Online Library to the new Literatum Wiley Online Library, which really left less room for error, right? So when you get into things like linking and redirects and stuff, you really can't, the changes that libraries you need to be making, for example, or vendors need to be making, need to really be synchronized to when the new platform goes live. Otherwise, you're essentially pointing to users to a place that doesn't exist yet. So again, we had to take a lot of careful planning, and it was very delicate process, to say the least. So I want to talk a little bit, before talking about the communications, specifically the data exchange experience. So I advocated strongly that we had redirects, which really proved essential, and I think mitigated the amount of access issues that we had with users who are unable to update to the new links or where the content did live. So if there's one piece of advice I can impart to any other publishers or platform providers in the room, is to really make sure that you get redirects put up, and hopefully in perpetuity as well. If you think about folks who have bookmarked content, I think it really does cut down on the amount of access issues, or certainly user errors where they're not going to see a 404 page or a page not found message in their browser. I know that in some cases we had users who were using the old Wiley InterScience redirects. So it's a redirect on a redirect, which didn't work actually. So again, it really just underscores the importance of accurate or up-to-date redirects in place. But that's really not the panacea that will solve everything, right? So ideally, you want vendors and librarians to have the most up-to-date linking available. So we really did this by communicating with our vendor partners, and again, you know them all, right? OCLC, EBSCO, ProQuest, Exlibris, to make sure that they had the new open URL parameters, that they had our KBART files, which contained the linking syntaxes and targets for journals, MARC records providers. OCLC is our MARC record provider, making sure that the 856 fields were updated, and any linking that was in chapter and article level metadata. So sending that to vendors beforehand, but then also, again, synchronizing that to when the hard cutover happened in March of 2018. We also had to work with OCLC to make sure that our proxy stanzas were up to date. So shout out to them where they were able to test the new URLs and making sure that they were working and helping communicate that out as a call to action for any mutual easy proxy users for Wiley Online Library. We also had to work with Crossref to make sure that the digital object identifiers, or DOIs, were updated with the content. I think that was fairly important because a lot of researchers, citations use DOI linking, right? So it was, given the size of our portfolio, it was no small undertaking to get this data in place, but Crossref was a very gracious partner in making sure that this was done quickly and on time. Usage data was a bit of a different story. So we essentially kept the old platform, the old Wiley Online Library platform administrator dashboard kind of on life support even after the migration, so that users could access usage data even after the migration happened, because we didn't want to sort of cut off that usage data. And there were a lot of complexities involved, or idiosyncrasies rather, in getting that legacy usage data over to the new platform. So we continued to provide it on the old platform until 2019, where we used the Counter 5 code of practice migration as an opportunity to bring the legacy data over, but then also start providing Counter 5 usage data through the Add-upon Insights usage reporting tool. So that's really what users were seeing with with the usage data, and being able to provide that in a consistent way. But then we did migrate the usage data to the new Wiley Online Library going back to 2010, I believe. So again, we wanted to make that usage data consistently available because obviously it plays such a critical role in collection development decisions. And going back to the communications piece, so on this bento box over here to the right, you can see sort of screenshots of the resources that we were able to provide. That first and foremost, we created a migration hub site to house all of the resources that we created, to point librarians, to point users, to point different stakeholders for information over here. We also created a global email campaign with something like 33,000 global librarians. We really tried to cast a wide net to get the information out to all librarians, to let them know that the migration was coming and to inform them of any actions that they potentially had to take to make sure that this was a seamless migration and that there was no drop in access, right? So we ultimately sent 3 messages way before, 2 months, a month before, and then essentially right, but the day before, to remind users of the migration that it was taking place, and then a sort of a subsequent post migration message with a survey for users to let them know that the migration had happened. But all the while pointing again to this migration hub site to a few resources, including very thorough technical FAQ, which had in-depth information about linking and parsing and usage data and sushi credentials and anything else you can think of that an electronic resource librarian might be concerned with. We also posted a URL crosswalk document, excuse me, which resembles a KBART file, except that we included very high-level linking syntaxes to show what abstracting linking would look like on the new profile, what table of contents linking would look like, PDF linking, all of that stuff, in addition to the landing pages for journals and books and reference works. And again, given our portfolio, it was a very large document, but again, showing what the old URL would be and then what the new one would be in case the libraries had to take any actions to update the URLs themselves. We did try to take a centralized approach in communicating this information to vendors and saying that hopefully that, by pushing this information to the vendors, they would push it in turn to our mutual customers. So not every single library would have to make these changes individually. We do appreciate that there are some librarians who A, wanted this data, but then B, also wanted to make these changes. We also provided a succinct checklist of sort of the action items that libraries potentially needed to take with things like testing access and checking bookmarks and MARC records and open URLs and things like that as well. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, was training our support staff to make sure that they were armed with knowledge to handle questions before, during, and after the migration. So there are a lot of challenges that we faced. I probably couldn't fit them all on one page, but I think that these are probably the most important ones and will certainly resonate with the other publishers or anyone else, any other content provider that has to undergo a platform migration. The first was the rolling launch date. We had initially, we're going to launch in late February, and that got pushed back. And then the go and no-go decision was made 2 days before the platform migration actually happened. So then we had to scramble to get the email out to as many people as possible to let them know that it was happening over the weekend. It was certainly a strenuous time, to say the least. Finding the right person or persons, that was another challenge that I faced individually. It was finding the right product person, speaking to the right, either on the Wileys side or the Adapon side, or to other colleagues who were ultimately, would be affected by this migration or had information. In addition to, we were able to leverage external partnerships for information, but sometimes those weren't necessarily the right person to go to either. So they had to relay the information or put us in touch with someone who we needed to speak to. And then also on the library side, all of the contacts for our global email campaign, a lot of them are folks who are making purchasing decisions and are stored in our customer retail management system, not necessarily the electronic resource librarian who need to make the changes, needed to be aware of this. So it was our hope that our contacts would sort of push this information on to relevant colleagues, but we couldn't necessarily guarantee that because we didn't have all the information. Meeting all stakeholders' needs, as I mentioned, more than libraries and library users were affected by this. We had to consider society needs, author needs, corporate needs as well. So bringing all of that together, working with those colleagues, making sure that their needs, be they communication or technical, were also met proved challenging at times. And post-migration troubleshooting. So despite all of the efforts that we made, there were still access issues post-migration. I'm hoping that we mitigated a lot of them by providing information both to librarians and to our support team, but ultimately we were getting questions about, about the platform, either during the launch or post-launch, that proved certainly trying or harrowing at times. The fundamental question that sort of kept me up at night during this whole process was, did we do this right? So there were no standards in place around how to do this. I certainly looked at what other publishers had done in terms of platform migrations, and certainly my own experiences as a librarian in my past life helped inform what we ultimately did and how Wiley acted, at least from a communication standpoint or technical services pieces. But I always wondered, was there going to be some sort of fallout from this? So there was this sort of a looming sort of paranoia that it really didn't subside until after launch. The good news is that we did launch a post-migration survey, and we were met largely with favorable results. That really the only complaint was that we didn't give enough time right before launch, which really couldn't have been helped because of the go, no-go decision being made 2 days prior to the launch and then scrambling to get the information out. So that was a dependency on our product team that unfortunately we couldn't help. But other than that, I think we were able to effectively communicate the changes to libraries. But again, that's sort of that fundamental question certainly loomed large, at least until after we launched. So I think that's actually a good segue into Jan's portion of the presentation to describe the librarian experience, not just from Wiley, but from other publisher migrations as well. So I'll just pass this over to Jan now. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Matthew. I'm trying to look like I have control of the slide. Let's give it a try. Just bear with me for a minute. I'm trying to figure this out. Look like I do have a control, but there might be a delay.
So we can see your cursor moving.
Yes. I pressed my keyboard. Doesn't look like it's moving. Let me try. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. Sorry about the delay. Thanks, Matthew. It's always helpful to hear a publisher's perspective as we all work together to improve the process. So I will be sharing our platform migration experience at NC State University Libraries. All right, great. So in NC State University Libraries, we have access to 1.3 million ebooks, 122,000 e-journals, and 678 databases. So how are content migration managed in our libraries? The Acquisition Discovery Department oversees our e-resource lifecycle, and content migration is one of the activities under the e-resource management umbrella. Within the department, the monograph unit, which I'm in, manages streaming videos and ebooks, while our serial unit is responsible for e-journals and databases. So a big shout out to my colleagues at NC State University Libraries. Starting in 2016, as shown here, as a fiscal year 2017, what you're seeing here, we saw an uprising in the number of platform migrations. So we decided to use Trello to help us manage our content platform migration. For those of you who don't know Trello, it is an open source project workflow management tool, and we have been using it for many of our workflow and projects. So since then, each year, we dealt with a handful of migrations on our publisher and vendor platforms. So what do you see here are 17 monograph migrations that directly impacted us, and we need to do something about them. This doesn't include migrations that do not impact us or those that our serial unit handled and documented on their own Trello card. To start the process, we first need to be notified with migration. The notification comes to us through a variety of channels. A good number of notifications come directly from our publishers. Some of them include a very detailed checklist, which we really love to see. Some migrations are announced on listservs. We don't always monitor our listservs, but we have run into a few as a serendipitous encounters, which is good. Our knowledge base provider also provides change alerts related to migrations. A couple of times, colleagues from other departments pass on the migration emails that they receive. There are also times we receive patron access issue reports that are caused by migration. Once we become aware of the migrations, we need to evaluate the impact on us. To do that, we ask the following questions. When is it going to happen? Is it now, in a weeks, or in a few weeks, or in a month? Knowing timeline is important for us to plan ahead. The second question is, will our resources be affected? Where are they? Knowing that publishers usually send out a global campaign email, as the Matthew just mentioned earlier, not necessarily a customized notification to individual customers. There are times a migration will not affect us at all. The third question is important. Will the URL be redirected temporarily or permanently? To add permanent redirect means we don't need to update any records or links. A temporary redirect indicates we need to update links and mark records. The last question is, what do we need to do? So what do we need to do? There are times we don't need to do anything. More often though, we need to do something. Let's take a look at the action that we have to take with a few examples here. Some migrations involve updating mark records. This is a example of our MyEye library migration to eBook Central. On the left is a screenshot of the Trello card for this migration. For this particular migration, it's more complex because we have mark records from our knowledge base provider and also records batch loaded into our IIS. We had to identify updated mark records that were batch loaded into our IIS. We also needed to communicate with our knowledge base vendor, making sure that those records provided by our knowledge base vendor were updated as well. Updating Easy Proxy is another most common action we take. The example on the left shows the notification we received from Gil about a change from HTTP to HTTPs. It says we might need to update our Easy Proxy, which turned out to be the case. The message also mentioned auto redirect, which means we don't need to update the URLs. So there are times we need to get a clarification from publishers due to our specific local system setup. In that case, we all need to look for more clarification from our publishers. All right, there's a delay in slide change. Let's give it a second. All right. Do you see my mouse moving here? All right.
I do not. Let me know if you want me to advance the slide.
That'd be great. Thank you, Asina. All right. So other actions we have taken include download a usage report to know that our department doesn't manage usage report, which are managed by our collection department. If a migration involves usage report change, we will pass it on to our collection department so they can gather some necessary reports before the old platform is demolished. Sometimes a migration requires us to set up a new admin account. When a migration affects any user directly, sometimes a migration may cause temporary interruption to the platform, and we will need to notify our public service folks to give them a heads up. The local migration process typically starts with the e-resource librarians at our libraries. It may involve colleagues within the department or in other departments. For mark records update, are usually pulling our catalogers in our unit. Sometimes a migration may involve other departments. For example, a serious e-resource librarian shared with me that there was a database migration showing up in our best bet search result, which were managed by different departments. Other time, we had our IT involved with some more complex Easy Proxy update. Next slide, please. I have to say, most of our migration have been quite smooth with no trouble at all or just some minor issues, but there are a couple of snags which may get overlooked and need our attention. Of course, the purpose to bring them up is not to complain, but rather to make stakeholders aware so as to take actions to improve them. So the first one, although we have many channels to receive migration notice, as I mentioned earlier, we don't always receive them ahead of time. So we stumbled into a couple of those. The second one, we had trouble identifying affected records not coming from our knowledge base. The URLs for these records usually might have gone through several changes, so it was not easy to identify them in our catalog system. Sometimes older content didn't get migrated correctly. We reported those to the publishers. There were times migration happened when affected resources were used by our class. If a resource were migrated correctly and properly, everything would be fine. Otherwise, this is very disruptive to our users, especially very often that resolving them takes time. So the last one I want to mention is migration during peak usage period. Panels or in the middle of the term. The diagram at the bottom shows is a snapshot of our users' electronic resource use from last February to this February. We can clearly see there's a pattern here. Peak usage occurs from February to end of May, then drops in summer starting June until August. In September, usage picks up again, then slows down during Christmas and early January, and back up again in February. So no matter how much we have prepared for migration, there are always unforeseen issues. To minimize the interruption, we hope that publishers will take this usage pattern into consideration when planning their platform migration if possible, avoid peak usage period, plan switchover during summertime when usage is low. We understand it is not always possible because publishers may have customers across the globe with different time zones or schedules. That's understandable, but just do as you can. Next slide, please. If we were to be granted a wish by Genie, we would wish for a seamless transition with minimal interruption to our users. And that's where the NISO content platform migration projects comes about. Now I'm going to pass on to Asina, who will talk about the project.
Okay, so those were really good presentations that show a lot of the work that's involved in the content platform migration from the publisher, platform vendor, and librarian's point of view. So all of this dialogue started happening in NISO, which is the National Information Standards Organization, in the Information Policy and Analysis Topic Committee. So we had a survey out about some projects that might be worth looking at to create some sort of standards or recommended practices around. And Kim Steinele, or I'm sure I butchered that, I'm sorry, Kim, and I, we were both on the IPA, and we were talking about the number of migrations and the amount of work that is involved for libraries and for publishers. So Duke University Press, where Kim is from, had migrated platforms recently, and UCF as a library was on the receiving end of many of these migrations as well. So publishers, we did an informal survey on ERNL list about how many migrations people were experiencing and asked people to crowdsource a Google Doc to document these. Publishers had one about every 5 to 10 years. Content platform vendors were experiencing them about 5 to 10 per year. And librarians were experiencing 10 or more per year. And it was a growing trend. I think a lot of that is to do with the not only migrations just from one content platform to another for a publisher without new content, but publishers buying new content, adding in new things to their existing platform and so forth. So there's a lot of migration going on. So we talked about it and decided to create a work item. And once we did that, our first step was to find people who would be willing to share their expertise. So we cast out a call for participants. We got a huge response. We had so many people who were interested, which I think speaks to how many people are impacted by this and how many people feel like they could have benefited from additional guidance. So we had a wealth of participants to choose from, and these are ultimately the members that were selected. And there's been some turnover as people found they could no longer participate, and we've added new people in. So the work item, this is basically a summary of what we wanted to do. We wanted to develop a recommended practice to help standardize the process and provide recommendations to improve communications before, during, and after migrations. So a lot is bundled into that. And a recommended practice is different than a standard. It is going to give ideas about how to do something well. It's not saying this is a standard way. It's not nearly as rigorous in the process of creating it, reviewing it, or following it. But this is what we set out to do in terms of a process of preparing this recommended practice. We wanted to investigate the state of migration. So we had a lot of interviews with different stakeholders. We had some surveys and literature reviews, a lot of reviewing of vendor communications and checklists that had been provided over the years, and looking at the timelines, cycles, and decisions that were communicated about various migrations. We looked at related standards, including this list. I'm not going to read them all in the for the sake of time. We're running a little short, but there's a lot of standards that exist that come into play during the migration, some of them a little bit more closely related than others. And then we really wanted to pull in a lot of the stakeholder perspectives and experiences. And just listening to Matthew and Jan, you could hear that there are a lot of people and organizations involved in a migration. So your knowledge bases and the Crossref and the librarians, of course, and all of these different entities that need to be involved. And we needed to find out what steps they need to be contacted, who to contact, what they need to be told, and so forth to pull this into our recommended practice. So we also planned on exactly what we might want to deliver, and this is what we're working towards. Recommendations, a communication plan, checklists that give specific things about who's doing what at what time and who the other stakeholders are involved, and a glossary of terms so people know exactly what we mean when we say migration. So this was our timeline, and up until the right initial draft, it's pretty much accurate. The right initial draft period has sort of expanded. We originally had planned it to be done a few months ago, but we don't want to rush it. We want to get it done to a good end and make sure that we're happy with it before we move on. But after we finish writing the draft, we'll have a comment period and people can give feedback. And this is open to everyone. So you can look at it and say, but you missed this, or this part doesn't describe what needs to happen in that stage. So look for that, and we hope you will give feedback during that stage. And then after we get all those comments in, we'll respond to them and revise the draft, and then have a publication and promotion period. So that is the NISO IPA work group process. And I want to highlight that it's something that is not, if you have an idea for NISO, for any of their focus areas or work areas, then it's not something that you can just say, well, I guess I don't know what to do. You can contact NISO and you can be involved in one of these groups yourself. So a little plug for participating in NISO and standards making. And I think now I'll move on to any questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and look at the questions. So I don't know. Go ahead.
Hey,
How do you manage the platform changes with your library system?
Could you repeat that question? I apologize, I didn't catch the first part.
How do you manage the platform changes with your library system?
I think that Jan might want to speak to that, but I'll throw in that the integrated library system is going to have a lot of links, and depending on the nature of your system, you may be having to do updating of 856s through global search and replaces, or you might get that through the knowledge base when it's updated. Hopefully that information would be coming from the platform provider to the knowledge base, and then it would be updated if that's the format you have. For the University of Central Florida, we have a very outdated version of Aleph, so we have to do a lot of global searches and replaces, and that can go pretty well, excuse me, if it's a relatively straightforward change, if there's something that's very consistent to search for and something that's very easy to replace with, like if there's a document identifier, a DOI is perfect. We can find that, we can replace the bits around it that need to change, and there you go. But if it's, for instance, 10 years out of date URL for something that then goes through a redirect that then doesn't have anything in common with the new URL, that gets very difficult. But I'll let someone else who's probably more experienced with actually doing changes in the ILS respond.
I can answer some of those questions. I think Sina addressed pretty much everything we do here at our library too. So I think very important is you have to know where our data come from, or where they go to. I mean, regarding to resources, I know sometimes library have a complex system like us. We have a suite of systems. We have RS, we have knowledge base, we have discovery system, and also database of our local URMs. So I think once you know your data to pipeline, where the data come from, and then where they go to, you should be able to identify them and fix them as they come in, like the URL change in ILS, and then there's easy proxy configuration change if you're using easy proxy. And the knowledge base, of course, as Athena mentioned, that you have to contact your knowledge base provider, have them update the links on their end. Okay, I hope that answers the question. I see another question about the Trello. There are several people asking about Trello. So we're using the free version of Trello. It has been working great for us. The only thing with the free version is that I think you can only have 10 Trello boards, free Trello boards with the free version. So that's something you have to manage locally. And another question about if we have a checklist for Trello. I don't have a specific checklist, but the question I listed today, that's pretty much all the questions I ask when I'm handling this migration. And in the Trello board, I didn't mention that I do have different tabs in Trello. You can mark it if this migration require action or does not require action. You can also mark like a deadline when this migration happens, and that's something you have to have it done before that deadline. So you can manage all of this in Trello. All right, I hope that's helpful.
As far as the comment that PyJ is another NISA recommended practice that ideally would be included in the best practices and standards, that is absolutely true. And I believe there is a section on PyJ. The way we did this is we divvied up who was more or less familiar with different aspects of the migration and different standards. And then we wrote summaries of how they relate to migrations. And so for a lot of the standards, there's going to be a little blurb that describes how they relate and what the standard is. And I do think that PyJ is one of them. I didn't do the PyJ or KBARD or any of those standards. I was more focused on counter and some of the other things. So I couldn't speak to what they said about PyJ. I don't remember who did that section.
There was another question here, or rather a statement that I just wanted to address because I think it's an important one from an anonymous attendee. They say, quote, "It is very difficult to consider launch date of migration by publishers and access providers. Preference is always during intersessions and break to avoid disruptions. That's absolutely right. I will say that from our experience, we launched in March, which is right smack dab in the middle of semester, at least in the United States, which was something that ideally perhaps we could do in July, perhaps when class is not in session, or at least during the larger semesters. But that is a great point that I think that we should endeavor to include in the recommended practice as well.
Though there has been some feedback that worldwide there doesn't seem to be an ideal time. And given that many of the platforms affect customers worldwide, it sort of puts them in a rock and a hard place, because if you choose a date that's great for the United States, it might not be great for some other region.
Absolutely, there's no one size fit all, I think.
We have a couple of more minutes if there are any other questions or comments.
All right, doesn't seem like there are any other questions. So thank you for attending this NASIG 2020 session. This recording will be posted to our YouTube channel in the coming weeks. The speakers will be monitoring the NASIG forum through June 2020 for any questions not covered during the session. Please join us for our next session, and thank you to our presenters for their fantastic presentation.